Quiet.
Mr. President-elect,
Go ahead.
can you state
She's asking a
categorically,
question. Don't
Mr.
be
President-elect, can you give us a question?
Don't be
You are
rude.
attacking us. Can you give us a question?
Don't be rude.
Can
No,
you
I'm
give
not
us a
going to give you a
question?
question. I'm not going to give you a question.
Can you state categorically?
You are fake news.
Sir.
I'm Dr. Dave Janda. Welcome back to Dave versus the MSM. I'd like to thank you for joining me today and thank you for networking this information to all those you know and love, because the more people that are educated, the more people that become empowered, and the sooner we end this reign of terror. And it is a reign of terror that is not an accident, it's not a coincidence, and it's not from incompetence. It is willful. It is about a small number of people worldwide, peg it at several thousand, that essentially are the puppeteers. And 99.9% of those in government, a big chunk of folks in industry, are the puppets implementing this freedom stripping agenda. Why? Because either they get a paycheck out of their operations that they're being the puppet for, or because they have been propagandized to the point that they're brainwashed. And I guess there's the other option, that a little of both, or a lot of both. Today I want to talk about the power behind the throne. We have gone into significant depth on this at davejanda.com, where we do 4 to 5 other video shows a week. The podcast for our 3-hour radio show is also available there. The price on the subscription side to get the most in-depth content and part of our email service is less than a half a pizza a month. And the way inflation's going, it's about the price of a cup of high-end coffee a month that provides you information that puts you months, years ahead of the curve. And if you don't believe me, fine. But read the comments from our subscribers on that platform. Now, you don't have to sign up for a year. You can sign up for a month. And then if you don't like it, get rid of it. But I don't know why you would. Because it's information that is there to put you ahead, to protect you. One of the big problems in the freedom movement is I believe there's a lack of appreciation for how evil, with a capital E, evil our adversaries are. And they are. The globalist cult, the globalist syndicate, the New World Order crowd, the criminal international banking syndicate, the deep state, the shadow government, whatever you want to call it. It's all the same. A relatively small group of individuals that have a little wider spread with their puppets around the world that's focused on stripping you and me and everyone we know of our freedoms and our liberties and our future and our lives. It's that simple. And they have to be stopped. But to stop them, you have to know who they are. Because they create these events around the world. They're really good at creating wars. And they want you to point at these wars or these events that they create as the reason why a system is coming down. In particular, the financial system of the world coming down. They want you to point at Russia, Ukraine. That's the reason. They want you to point at the Middle East. That's the reason. They want you to point at Taiwan and China. That's the reason. They want you to point at the guy in North Korea shooting missiles. That's the reason. No. The reason is the banking syndicate and the families at the top of that pyramid. They're the ones that should have the finger pointed at them as causing these problems. But they create these diversions. And then they use their tentacle, the bought-off lamestream fake media, to propagandize and coerce people into thinking that it's really these other events that's causing the takedown of the system, because they don't want your finger pointing at them. But that's what we do, which is why we're targeted, why our content is suppressed to the max. To the max. So let's talk about the power behind the throne. Frederick Douglass addressed power, and here's what he said. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and it never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. And these will continue until they are resisted with either words or blows or with both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. End quote. So in other words, it's up to all of us. Sitting on the couch isn't going to get it done. Frederick Douglass is right. Action is the appropriate step. And the first part of action is in identifying who is pulling the strings. This was recently written, The Power Behind the Throne and the Bankers Forever Wars, by Alex Craner. I want to read a couple segments of his essay he recently wrote. Recently, now remember, I have spoken to you about this, my experience, firsthand experience, about this power behind the throne for a number of years. In the spring of 1988, I was asked to be a consultant on healthcare policy to the Reagan administration in the spring of 88. Now remember, the election happened in November of 88. So this is toward the tail end of the Reagan administration. And when a number of us that were brought in were for policy issues and helping with policy, we were given an orientation meeting. And one of Reagan's top assistants came in and said, we need to set the foundation of your policy development for the president. Number one, do not focus or never submit anything to the president that is based on the right-left axis. You know, the old Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, conservative, progressive. What we were told, and this is 1988, the president believes that is theater. Interesting, coming from Ronald Reagan, a former actor. The president believes the right-left axis is theater and is meant to divide. The axis you need to focus on is the up-axis, freedom, and developing policies to present to the president that focus on the freedom side of the equation. Because on the bottom side of that equation, the so-called bottom part of that y-axis, are those in government and in industry, the private sector, that are focused on oppressing every American, every person of the world, and stripping of their freedoms. Did not say in 88, globalist cult, globalist syndicate, deep state, new world order crowd, criminal international banking syndicate, shadow government. Didn't say that. But that's who she was talking about. And that's who the president gave the directive about. Those cats focusing on oppression, stuff them with the policies you develop that focus on freedom. Which brings me to this essay. Alex Craner. Recently, former UK Prime Minister Liz Truss gave an eye-opening, at least to some, of a revelation which deserves to be set to the record. Here's what she said, quote, "What I found out when I got to number 10 Downing Street, Prime Minister's residence, is I thought that if I got to the top of the tree, I would be able to implement those conservative policies. But what I discovered was that I was not holding the levers of power." Even as the prime minister, right? "The levers were held by the Bank of England, by the Office of Budget Responsibility, and they were not held by the prime minister or the chancellor." Truss then went on to point out obvious problems with this. "You can sack the prime minister," she said, "but you cannot sack the Bank of England officials who hold the levers of power," the banksters. But this wasn't the first time. Former British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli said in 1844 that, quote, "the world is governed by very different persons from what is imagined by those who are not behind the scenes." Sir William Pitt, Prime Minister in 1770, said that, quote, "there is something behind the throne greater than the king himself," end quote. Alex Craner goes on, "In entangling the causal factors behind the many crises we face today, the trail of breadcrumbs always leads to the international banking cartel, which appears to have the determining influence shaping the system of governance under which our societies operate. As a famous member of that cartel proclaimed, Rothschild, quote, "Permit me to issue and control the money of a nation, and I care not who makes the laws," end quote. At the money power's receiving end, Napoleon Bonaparte understood that relationship all too well. When a government is dependent upon bankers for money, they and not the leaders of the government control the situation, end quote. So you wonder why there are all these wars, right? Well, Woodrow Wilson helped out with that one, right? In 1913, in a Congress that on Christmas Eve night passed legislation handing the money printing capabilities of the United States from the Treasury Department to a group of independent bankers that are only looking out for bankers, called the Federal Reserve. As we pointed out, bears repeating. Too many people don't realize this. The Federal Reserve is not a part of the executive, legislative, or judicial branches of the United States government. They're an independent entity. They're only looking out for the interests of banksters. Alex Craner goes on, in particular, the banking interests appear to be the key movers behind the perpetual warfare we are witnessing today. By the way, let's mention yet again, because this always gets me in trouble, the bankster families at the very top of the pyramid. The Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Lazards, the Pinkuses, the Warburgs, the Seifs, the Loebs. And at the very top, the Payseur, Payseur. Look it up, Payseur family. The better we understand the way the system works, the more the saying, quote, "all wars are banker wars," end quote, rings true. U.S. Congressman Ron Paul, which, by the way, of all the folks I've dealt with in Washington, the most honest. Ron Paul said that it was no coincidence that the century of central banking coincided with the century of total war. In the most recent past, it was Ukraine which was militarized to strike against Russia, with the same powers behind the throne pulling the levers, the banksters. I've spoken to you about Smedley Butler and his book, War is a Racket, published in 1933. Butler at the time was the most decorated Marine in United States history. He was a Major General. In his book, let me give you a couple quotes. War is just a racket. A racket is best described, I believe, as something that is not what it seems to the majority of people. Only a small inside group knows what it is about, the power behind the throne. It is conducted for the benefit of the very few, the banksters, at the expense of the masses, you and me. I wouldn't go to war again as I have done to protect some lousy investment of the bankers, he writes. There are only two things we should fight for. One is the defense of our homes, and the other is the Bill of Rights. War for any other reason is simply a racket. It may seem odd for me, a military man, to adopt this position. Truthfulness compels me to. I spent 33 years and 4 months in active military service as a member of this country's most agile military force, the Marine Corps. I served in all commission ranks from second lieutenant to major general, and during that period I spent most of my time being a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street, and for the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster, for what's called crony capitalism. I suspected I was part of a racket at the time. Now I'm sure of it. Like all the members of the military profession, I never had a thought of my own until I left the service. My mental faculties remained in suspended animation while I obeyed the orders of higher-ups. This is typical with everyone in military service. During those years in the service, I had, as the boys in the back room would say, a swell racket. Looking back on it, I feel that I could have given Al Capone a few hints. The best Capone could do was to operate his racket in 3 districts in the Midwest. I, on the other hand, operated on 3 continents. Major General Smedley Butler. The power behind the throne, Reader's Digest version, is the banking syndicate. Through these wars, they get more power, control, and more financial resources. You name the war, and you got the answer. And in the process, they see it as an added benefit that all of us that they call useless eaters, and they do, well, we're the ones that get drafted. We're the ones who do the trench work. And we're the ones who get maimed, disabled, and killed, while they make more of their ever-precious money, so that they can then bribe all of their little puppets, marionettes, in the governments around the world. The power behind the throne. The only way we end their reign of terror is identifying who is our adversary, as evil as it is. Because they will do anything and everything to make you believe that they don't even exist, that it's conspiracy theory, that you should blame whoever they put on point as the perpetrator of a heinous act. Oh, you can blame them. But understand, it doesn't start and stop with their puppet. There's a whole food chain above them. And it all ends in the top of that pyramid. Right? And at the top of that pyramid is their banking syndicate families. That is where you should be pointing your finger as the perpetrators of this reign of willful terror. I thank you for joining me today. We are available 24/7 with extra shows, content, guests, analysis, archives to all of our shows at davejanda.com. We hope you'll join us. It is a location that is uncensored and is secure. We hope you become part of our freedom family. Until next time, Dave Janda signing off. Dream big and dare to fail. Thanks for your time today.